What's going on? Welcome to a brand new episode of Breakaway Coverage. I'm John Carlo Nadeau, your host, and I'm absolutely delighted to be speaking with Karissa Donkin, who's done a lot to cover women's hockey. Karissa, a CBC Sports journalist and also the author of Breakaway. Great name, Karissa, and thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, really looking forward to talking to you. I know before we jumped on here, I had told you that it was really cool to be speaking with you and something that I was really looking forward to do. So glad we're able to do it now. Would just kind of love to know where you grew up and why hockey became so important to you.
Yeah, so I live in New Brunswick now, which not a lot of people know. We don't have a PWHL team in New Brunswick, so I kind of do it from a distance. That does surprise some people. But I love the Maritimes. Big fan of living here, of being here. I grew up in New Brunswick. I grew up in a small city called St. John, which is kind of in the southern part of the province. And yeah, I didn't actually get a chance to play hockey growing up, ice hockey at least. I played a ton of ball hockey, but with ice hockey, it was just so expensive. I had a single mom, and honestly, we couldn't afford it. But I always loved hockey. I watched a ton of it. It was something my grandfather and I used to do together. So when I was growing up, we would go see St. John Flames games. So that was the American Hockey League team that we had. If you look behind my shoulder, you'll see it's a 2001 Calder Cup Championship parade in St. John. So that was a team that was really special to me, and we just watched a ton of hockey at home too. So we'd watch Hockey Night in Canada together. My grandfather, ended up getting quite sick a little bit further down the line, and he couldn't go to games anymore. So we'd listen to them on the radio sometimes, the AHL games. So I've just always loved the game, and definitely that love comes from him. And I do play now as an adult, so definitely see it from that side as well. But it's just something I've always loved, and just kind of gravitated to writing about it because, yeah, women's hockey in particular, there hasn't always been a ton of coverage about it, and I just sort of thought about what would I like to see as somebody who's always been a fan of women's hockey.
Yeah, talk to me about the excitement over there with that PWHL game.
Yeah, I was in Halifax for the first game that PWHL had there back in December. So that was between Montreal and Toronto, and there were quite a few local connections there with, Turnbull, who we've talked about, Ali Monroe, who plays for the Scepters. She's from Yarmouth, Nova Scotia, and then you had both head coaches as well for those teams from the province as well. And yeah, the place was pretty electric. It was sold out in Scotiabank Center, and everywhere you go on the streets, like around downtown, they had ads on the lamppost. So you'd look up and you'd see Jill Saulnier's face kind of staring down at you. So the city was really excited for it. They also had an event downtown sort of celebrating women's sport, and they had Jana Hefford there and Amy Shear, two of the executives with the PWHL, just talking about kind of how women's sport has grown and the business of women's sport. And a lot of local business leaders who seem pretty excited about women's sport. We have a Northern Super League team in Halifax as well. So it feels like there is an appetite for professional women's sports in the Maritimes. Whether Halifax gets a team or not remains to be seen. There are a lot of cities that would be good candidates, but I think there's a lot of hunger for it here for sure.
Yeah, I mean, even the head coach for the Toronto Scepters said that to him, they should be their next decision for the league to move there, have a team there. Would you say the same thing? Like, if you're in the PWHL position, are you putting a team in Halifax?
Yeah, I mean, I think it checks a lot of boxes. You know, Infrastructure is the biggest thing for the PWHL when they're considering where to go. And Scotiabank Center is kind of the perfect arena, I would say. It has a great location downtown. It's not too big, it's not too small. They're kind of at the phase right now where an NHL sized arena is maybe a little bit too big for kind of what they're looking for. And the indication from Events East, which is the company that runs Scotiabank Center, is that they would perhaps have the support from the government to build some sort of training facility as well. So that's huge. That would be a huge mark, I would say, in Halifax's favor. Of course, then there's travel, right? So it's not close enough that Anybody could bus to the game. We don't have direct flights to some of the PWHL cities, like you couldn't fly, from Seattle directly to Halifax or anything like that. So, on that side of it, that is definitely a mark against Halifax, I would say. And then if you look at it through the lens of trying to get a major U.S. broadcast rights deal, which is definitely, something that the league is targeting, then you do kind of wonder, does a team in Halifax move the needle the way that a team in, say, Detroit would? So there's a lot to consider. I don't think, the league knows yet where they're going to put those teams. I wouldn't be surprised to see there before expansion teams and kind of get it all done at once and then sit at 12 for a while, which has kind of been the magic number that the league has been targeting. But yeah, I think Halifax does, check quite a few boxes. So it'll be interesting to see where it lands with that.
Yeah, I want to ask you about relocation, and this is a bit of a tough question, but when it first started, obviously you had Boston, New York, and Minnesota on the American side, and then in the Canadian side, it was Ottawa, Montreal, and Toronto. And when they had the six, they were saying for a good period of time that they wanted to keep it at six. And then we start to hear that they wanted to add a couple more teams, and so they added Vancouver and they added Seattle and it doesn't seem like they're done yet. Are you at all concerned with all the shakeup that's happening because of this? Like, do you think they need to wait a little bit longer?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a couple different ways to look at it. From a business perspective, I don't see their books. I don't know whether they're making money yet. It's obviously a huge expenditure to create a league and then to fund 8 teams. But I think in the big picture, part of the reason why they wanted to expand was they didn't just want to be sort of a regional Eastern league, and I think that's really important when they're negotiating with some of these networks around a U.S. broadcast rights deal. Is to be able to be in multiple time zones, and so that's why expanding out west was so important. So I think that's part of it. And then from the perspective of hockey operations, I mean, there are a lot of talented players who are still not in the PWHL. I think that is something they have to definitely be careful about. They don't want to kind of dilute the product or have teams that aren't competitive or teams that are way better than other teams. That's always kind of been a goal of the league. I think a lot of people were concerned about that last year after the expansion draft, just looking at who Seattle and Vancouver was able to pick up. But I think we've seen so far this season that the parity in the league really has stayed intact. And, I think it was 7 points separating first place and eighth place, as of a couple days ago. So I don't think that's really a concern yet. So understandably, I mean, fans like to add 4 new teams. It's going to be a huge roster shakeup. But I think the goal of maybe doing it all at once is to kind of get it done at once and then sort of stand pat where you're at. So I think that's the thinking behind it, whether it's right or wrong. I guess we'll be able to look back on it years later and say, but I think that's sort of what they're going for.
Yeah, and just talking about you specifically, how did you first get involved covering the PWHL? And I'm sure before you started covering the PWHL, you were covering other things that kind of led you to that.
Yeah, so I've been a journalist for gosh, like more than 15 years now. And I started working in newspapers and then moved on to broadcast. And I spent quite a bit of time working as an investigative journalist with CBC. So working in a regional investigative unit where I was, producing all kinds of different investigative accountability type of projects. So really for me with hockey, like I reported on hockey a little bit when I was, starting out as a journalist and working at a newspaper and stuff like that. But it hadn't really been what I'd done for most of my career. I mostly did kind of like harder news type of stories, politics, stuff like that, which I really love doing. But during COVID, I just sort of ended up working on my book as a bit of a side project. I sort of just needed something to do with myself. And I thought about, if I could write about anything, what would I want to write about? Like, what would interest me enough to be able to do it in my free time and also, contribute something that's not out there. And I thought about it and settled on women's hockey and wanted to write a book that I really wanted to read but just didn't exist. And so that's sort of how I got into writing about women's hockey. And from there, I really enjoyed it. And it's been I guess, the better part of more than 2 years now that I've been working with CBC Sports covering the PWHL, but all kinds of other sports too. So it's been a bit of a pivot for me in terms of what I used to cover, but I think, all those things kind of connect together. And there are definitely lessons that I took from working on long-term projects as an investigative reporter that are useful. When I'm working on a major project like a book or, the accountability lens that I would bring to covering a politician. I can also bring that to covering the PWHL or covering whatever sport and asking, different types of difficult questions. So it sounds like it's quite a different thing, but I do think it does all connect together.
No, 100% I agree. And like that's exactly what I told you before we started was that I went to school to do broadcasting and journalism as well. And even what I'm doing with junior hockey, you'll find that one thing, something you do one year, you have to do the exact same thing, down the road, whether it's in the same season or a second season, it all kind of leads into one. All the work kind of is similar. It all kind of relates back to the same sort of thing. No matter who you're covering or what team you're on, at the end of the day, a lot of the patterns are going to be the same. So I understand where you're coming from when you say something like that. Speaking about differences, though, I want to know from your perspective what you think makes the PWHL different from other women's leagues that have had, in the past.
Yeah, it's a good question. Do you mean other sort of women's hockey leagues or just other women's sports leagues in general?
Yeah, I mean, we can take it both ways. Let's start with
Yeah.
the other women's hockey leagues that have existed prior to the PWHL. What makes the PWHL different?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's more professional. I don't think anybody would dispute that. That's something a lot of players have talked about is just not really having this level of investment before, whether that's, meals at the rink after a game or a practice, or having a full staff, dedicated just to you. Even like I talk about the Canadian Women's Hockey League a lot in my book, and that was a league that folded in 2019, but for a long time had a lot of the best players in the world playing there, and a lot of players did not have free equipment unless they were on the national team. So they were going out and buying their own sticks and their own tape and all that kind of stuff, gloves, you name it. So even something like that, to be able to, pick and choose what kind of equipment you're using and, what brand you use and to get pro stock equipment and then to have someone to maintain it for you and have your stall ready. Like that stuff sounds really basic for a professional player, but that wasn't always the reality in women's hockey. So I think that's been really the biggest difference. And then secondary to that, I think is just how it's been marketed. To have the broadcast that the PWHL has, like the accessibility to it, and that was something that previous leagues did not always have. So it's been marketed, I think, in a totally different way, and I think we're seeing the fruits of that. And so those are sort of the two main differences. But on the ice, I think we're also seeing that it's more physical for sure. Maybe than what a lot of people were used to before. Not to say that women's hockey has not. It has historically been physical, but it's definitely faster for sure. And I think a lot of people who only watch women's hockey during the Olympics, for example, every 4 years, they're going to tune in this year and just find that it's way faster than it was 4 years ago. And that's a direct result of the PWHL.
Yeah, and then let's just take a second and compare it to the other pro women's leagues that are out there in other sports.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you look at something like the WNBA, and obviously that's been around for a lot longer. So, it's hard, I guess, to really fairly compare, say, the PWHL to the WNBA because, it's they've had really different kind of journeys, and the WNBA has had such a long time to kind of establish itself. But I think we're seeing across all women's sports, whether it's basketball or soccer or, the PWHL. Of course, the PWHL has a single ownership structure, but you look at like the NWSL, for instance, and we're seeing record valuations of those teams. And so I think that kind of growth and interest in women's sport that we're seeing, it's not unique to the PWHL. We're seeing it across all of women's sports. And so, I think we see them take different pages from each other too. I think we're going to see that kind of from a labor perspective in the future. We've always kind of seen, and I talk about this a little bit in the book, Female hockey players have taken a lot from what the U.S. women's soccer team in particular has done from a labor perspective in terms of fighting for equal pay and stuff like that. So I think there are a lot of common threads that run through, and I think the interest that we're seeing in women's sport, runs across all women's sports.
What's your favorite memory so far of covering the PWHL?
It's a good question. The very first draft was really cool. That was a neat moment just because it was this sort of exciting beginning of something, and it's just cool to watch people have their dreams come true, right? And that goes for people who are fresh out of college and just starting their careers and really have nothing to compare it to, but also you look at somebody like Jocelyn Larocque, who went second overall in that draft, to the Toronto Scepters, and she's someone who has been playing professionally at a high level for a very long time and never thought she'd see the day. So that was really cool, to be a part of that, back in 2023, late 2023, at the CBC headquarters in Toronto. And Billie Jean King was there too, which is always cool.
Yeah, it always makes the day a little bit better.
Yeah, it was really cool to see her come out and address the crowd, and it was just a really cool moment and a really cool day.
Let's talk a little bit more about that book. I mean, I already gave you props for the name. I want to know a little
Thank
bit
you.
more though.
Yeah, like I said, it kind of came from, during COVID, sort of looking to write something that I always wanted to read but didn't exist. And I've always loved reading hockey books. I've got a ton of them behind me. But a lot of them historically have been written by men. A lot of them are about men. And even when I pitched my book, there really weren't very many books about women's hockey. So it was really hard to, I think, initially just make a case that this is a book that should be written. I also pitched it before the PWHL existed, so I was pitching a book about a league that did not exist yet. But I just started working on it even before I had a publisher, and the goal was always to kind of follow a season, sort of like we see with Formula One Drive to Survive. I just love kind of the storytelling within a season. So in this case, there's so much kind of context that happened before the PWHL's inaugural season. So it kind of builds up to that and then follows through the season. And then it ends up following along with the Montreal team, now called the Victoire, but didn't have a name at the time. And part of that, honestly, is because I live in New Brunswick, and this was a self-funded endeavor, and so I needed somewhere that I could drive to. So that was part of it. But I also think Montreal is kind of the center of the women's hockey universe. Obviously, Marie-Philippe Poulin is there, so that's part of it. But there's just such a long and um, you know bright history, I would say, of women's hockey in that province. And I think you go to a Montreal game, and I think you mentioned that you've been to a Montreal game too, so you know that people there just love women's hockey. And so I just felt like that was the right place to kind of tell that story. And it was about providing context about how we got here, but I also wanted it to be forward looking, as well. So that was really the goal of it. And I should tell your listeners too, I don't usually sound like this. I've got this like cold that's going around. So I'm sorry for whoever is like listening to this being like, oh my God. Um, I normally sound better. So
Nah,
apologies for that.
I think they're like that when I talk. That's why I let you
Yeah.
do most of the talking. Do you have a favorite PWHL team?
I don't. No. No, no, I don't cheer for any particular team. I couldn't do that. I'm neutral.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love the game of hockey, but yeah, as a journalist, it wouldn't be right or ethical for me to have a favorite team.
I had to try. I had to. I get asked that all the time too, and I can't answer it. So
Yeah, what's your favorite team? Your favorite player?
I like all of them. Favorite player, I mean, has to be Marie-Philippe Poulin. Like you said, right? I mean, she's kind of what sparked my interest in women's hockey in the first place. So she's responsible for a lot of people falling in love with the PWHL, and being from Vancouver and getting to see the Golden Knights is also really special. I think somebody who I talk to quite frequently within the league itself is Nina Job Smith. I had the chance to interview her already as well. She's awesome. I love being able to talk to her. And the only unfortunate thing with her so far is she's been hurt for so long.
Yeah.
She's just
Yeah.
getting her start now, but. It was, yeah, it's great. And then her girlfriend, Ashton Bell, is the captain. So you really can't go wrong there either. So yeah, it's been
Yeah.
super cool.
It's a beautiful rink too in Pacific
Yeah.
Coliseum. I was just in awe of the rafters. I think it's got to be one of the most beautiful rinks I've been in. I just love old barns like that.
Yeah, when you go, if you know, if you had the chance to go to that rink before the Golden Eyes existed, and now to go into the rink with the Golden Eyes being there, it's a night and day difference. They did a really good job working in that facility, and I was actually able to do an interview with somebody who basically oversaw that entire project for the Golden Eyes there. So that was super cool, just talking to her about the progress that was being done, the process, and everything like that. So. Yeah, it's awesome. So yeah, you got to come out and check out a game for sure.
Yeah, I got to go to the first game there back in November, which was awesome. But
Yeah,
no, I'd love to come back. I just
yeah,
I thought it was such a cool arena, and I also love the N64 music before the game gets started. I don't know if some of your watchers are or listeners are, are too young to get that reference, the GoldenEye reference, but
yeah. You're gonna have to explain it to me because I don't get it either.
it was like the James Bond video game. It was like kind of like it's the song they
Oh,
play. They took the music from that and they play
yeah.
it before the games. Yeah, I personally I love it as a millennial, but
You know, I feel like Vancouver, like the Golden Eyes, there's even the players are still trying to figure out what a Golden Eye is and what it means. Because you'll see like the fans go quack quack, in the arena, and then they have like all this taking flight, the video and things like that. Like I think everybody's still really trying to figure out what a Golden Eye is, but I think that's the fun part of it is they get to spend the season and maybe even more kind of figuring out their identity just as the team wants to figure out theirs. So, yeah, it kind of goes hand in hand.
I love that. Have you ever seen one in real life? Are they all around the place in Vancouver
Where a
or
duck?
like the one of these golden eyes? Yeah. Have you seen
Yeah,
one?
they must be. Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing, right? It's like, what is a golden eye? It's a matter of figuring it out. So, but yeah, there's definitely a lot of good things to come from that name, and that was one of the things that I was wondering myself for so long was what was the name going to be, and so I definitely did not disappoint.
Yeah, no, it's cool. I think the colors too um have really grown on me. Like at first when I saw the picture, I thought it was going to be a little bit more like kind of Edmonton Oilers-esque
Hmm,
colors,
hmm.
but once I saw it in person, I think it's
Yeah.
yeah, it's a beautiful color palette. It really has worked out for them.
Yeah, and that's what a lot of people were saying. They were comparing it to the Oilers, but growing up in that arena there with the Vancouver Giants, I actually like to think that the reason why they chose those two colors was because of the colors inside of the venue. When you look at the Coliseum, there's two different rows of seats. You got your upper level and your lower level, and the upper level all has blue seats, and the lower level all has reddish kind of brown seats, which is exactly what the colors are for the Golden Eyes. So I feel like they got some inspiration from that. Um, but that's just me, so I don't want to start any conspiracies. But that's what I've been telling people anyway. So
All right, well, that's quite a scoop.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, next time you won't be able to unsee it now that I told you that. Let's put it that way. So just talking a little bit more about the league, like what are some misconceptions about women's
Yeah.
hockey that still exist?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I still think there's a perception out there that it's not physical, which is definitely not true. I think, for anybody who watches a PWHL game, the kind of open ice hits that we see in the NHL, that's the kind of thing that the league doesn't want. But certainly that physicality around the boards, there's plenty of that. So that's one thing, I would throw out there for people who maybe haven't watched the league. It's definitely physical. It's definitely fast and skilled, and hopefully, I think with the physicality that continues to be a part of the game because I think that's something that I really love about women's hockey. So I would say, that's part of it. I think the other thing too is just sort of the ecosystem is very different from men's hockey. Most players do go to college and sort of finish out their eligibility there. So we're talking about people who are going into professional hockey at, maybe 22, 23 years of age, which is different than people getting drafted when they're, say, 18 years old, like we see in the NHL. And we don't have a minor league system in the PWHL. So really, it's You kind of make the team or you don't, and maybe you go over and play in Europe. There's not really a kind of development ecosystem that exists right now. That development really happens in the NCAA. So I think that's sort of a fascinating way of kind of how women's hockey works right now. It may not be that way forever, but I think it also means that, players are a little bit more kind of fully formed in a way when they come into the league and you're talking about people who are, I guess, just a little bit older in their lives too. So I find that kind of fascinating, and that might be something that people who, maybe just sort of poke their heads into women's hockey or don't know a whole lot about it might not know.
Yeah, and one more for you. And again, really appreciate you taking the time to do this. What impact do you hope that your work and the PWHL as a whole has on young girls growing up?
Yeah, that's a big one. I mean, you know what? When we're talking about misconceptions too, and it's not a misconception, but we talk a lot about, the impact of the league on young girls, which is 100% a huge thing. Definitely, if you can see it, you can be it. And that is certainly a real thing. And we're going to see lots of young girls who are growing up to play in the PWHL who, had those dreams ignited when they were at a PWHL game or, got to watch the league on TV, whatever the case may be. But I also think it's just, it's a really safe place for a lot of people, and a really exciting place for a lot of people. And, I think about Debbie Harrison is somebody who I interviewed in the first season of the league, and she's a season ticket holder with the Toronto Scepters. You might have seen her. She always has these really cool outfits on. Like she's dressed up as a crayon and a referee and all kinds of stuff like that. And she's someone who I don't know Debbie's age off the top of my head, and I'm not going to try and guess it because I don't want her to get mad at me. But she's played hockey for years and never got to see anything like that, growing up. And she's now somebody who's retired, right? And is finally getting to see this, and it's just a huge thrill for her. And I play with a lot of women, just in my kind of recreational hockey here in New Brunswick who, fit that bill too. So that is a long tangent, but it's not a misconception. But I do think like there are so many people for whom the PWHL is an exciting thing, and we always talk about like being an inspiration to young girls. But I think a lot of these women in their own right too are just like doing really cool things and in sports and in business and all that kind of stuff. In terms of what, I hope my work adds to it, like I just love covering the game. I want to cover it in a professional manner and ask good questions and, do accountability journalism and also kind of take people inside the league and inside the most interesting personalities in the league and kind of take people inside a place that they're not a part of and help them understand it. So that's always my goal, is to try and explain how things are and why they are that way and get to the bottom of things. And that was sort of how I approached things as a journalist when I was working in investigative journalism, and it's how I try to approach it now. So I think just being a good journalist is always the goal, and it's fun too. I also am having a lot of fun.
Yeah, a good journalist and a good podcast guest, Karissa. Thank you so very
Uh,
much for doing this. Really appreciated it.
Thank you, Giancarlo. I appreciate you having me. And again, sorry that I sound so raspy. So
It's all good.
thank you for your patience.
That's Karissa Donkin. I'm John Carlin Ado. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Breakaway Coverage. We're back with a new one every 2 weeks. Take care of yourself. We'll be back soon.